Welcome to the Aligned Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Pooja Venkatraman. I'm a double Harvard grad, former BCG consultant, and now an executive coach for high achievers. On this podcast, we are going to tackle the 4 key things that you need to figure out in order to live a life of aligned ambition. Those 4 things are stress, productivity, performance, and purpose. We are going to make sure that you're driving your car in the direction that you actually want to go. That is the purpose part. We're also going to make sure that your progress along the road is consistent and effective. That's the productivity and performance part. And we're going to make sure that the fuel you're pouring into your tank isn't so noxious that it's filling your car with fumes and making the whole ride miserable. That is the stress part. Because if you can tackle those 4 things, stress, productivity, performance, and purpose, you can build the life and the career that you actually want. Not the life you think you're supposed to have, not the life that burns you out or doesn't fit quite right, but the life you actually want. One that fulfills your biggest ambitions and unleashes your fullest potential without sacrificing your sanity, your relationships, your authenticity, or your paycheck. A life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. That's what aligned ambition is all about. Let's get started. Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the real reason why high achievers burn out. So if you're a high achiever, you are definitely familiar with burnout. You may have experienced it a couple of times yourself. You've certainly seen other people experience it. And at the very least, you've been close to experiencing it. You've noticed that you're sort of on track for burnout. And this is really normal, right? Because high achievers have always been in all of these really demanding environments, right? You probably went to an Ivy League school or grad school. And so you had all these peers around you that were also high achievers, and you felt like you needed to prove yourself and keep up with everyone. Everyone around you was always raising the bar. Your professors and assignments are demanding. So you're like, okay, I gotta go. I gotta perform and prove myself. And then once you left school, you probably went to a top consulting firm or a top finance firm or a top tech firm, and you entered a very demanding career path where same thing, these jobs demand a lot of you. Your bosses demand a lot of you. Everyone you see around you is also really ambitious, really driven, working super hard, gunning and go, go, go. And so you continue to be in this demanding environment that asks a lot of you, right? And you want to perform, you want to prove yourself. And I find this is very common with high achievers. You wouldn't even put yourself in these demanding environments if you weren't the kind of person who also has very high standards for yourself. So even if your boss or your teacher or your peers weren't sort of demanding that you work hard or that you do things to a high level of excellence, you demand that of yourself, right? That's kind of an identity that you have or a value that you have, which is I work really hard, I do really high quality work, and I just do things really freaking well. That's who I am. That's what I do. And so even if you're not in an environment that asks that of you, you still hold yourself to that bar and you still put that pressure on yourself, right? To do really great work. So you know exactly what burnout looks like or what approaching burnout can start to feel like. It can look like feeling really overwhelmed, feeling really stretched thin, like there's too much for you to do and you can't do it. You're always struggling. You're always just jumping from one thing to the next, no time to rest. It can also feel like just not caring. All of a sudden you're like, I just don't care about this anymore. I just don't want to do this. This feels meaningless. This feels like it doesn't have any purpose. And then you feel very stuck between well, the people around me are still demanding that I do great work and I still have my own really high standards, but now I don't want to, I don't care. And that's a very weird inner conflict to be experiencing. And then you have to push yourself to do the work. Often people also just kind of don't feel like themselves, right? You might notice yourself procrastinating a lot or just zoning out, numbing out with TV, food, alcohol, whatever is your preferred, thing of choice to just numb yourself out when your emotions are too intense. But you might kind of feel like this isn't me. It's not what I normally am like, but I'm noticing that I'm turning more to procrastination, to social media, to my devices, to these things to just numb out and get away from my life. And it's also very common for people to have physical symptoms, right, of burnout where, because you're carrying so much stress and tension in your body, you might have back pain, jaw pain, chronic pain of all kinds, a lot of pain, physical pain happens for people. You might find yourself getting sick a lot because continually being burnt out can affect your immune system. And so you might get sick all the time. You might have trouble sleeping. So all these physical symptoms can also pop up, right? So it's pretty uncomfortable, right? And so of course you want to cure it. Once you notice that you're on the track for it or that it's already fully happening to you, you're probably looking for solutions and trying to figure out what you should do to get out of the burnout state. And I think this is why it's all the more important to know what causes burnout. Because if you don't know the root cause of burnout, you then don't address the root cause of burnout, and you can end up having applying a imperfect solution to your burnout and then not actually fully curing it. You might not cure it where you are, or you also might temporarily cure it, get into your next job, get into your next situation, and then recreate burnout all over again, right? So it's very important to know the actual root cause so that you can knock it out for good or have the tools to be able to knock it out for good, if it ever pops up again, versus if you have the wrong solution, you don't actually ever solve the problem. So a lot of times what people think causes burnout, right? One is really long hours. They're like, oh, I'm working, like 12 hours, 13 hours, 15 hours a day. That is what's causing me to burn out. Burnout can be correlated with long hours, right? For sure. But I actually have found that hours by themselves are not the thing that causes burnout. People think, oh, I'm working a lot of hours. That's making me burn out. So now I need to get a job with fewer hours. You can burn out in a job with not that many hours. I've actually experienced this where one of my absolute busiest projects at BCG, where we were regularly staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning every single night, was also one of my most fun projects. I had the best time, did not burn out, loved the team, loved the work, and genuinely look back so fondly on that time. And I had another phase in my career where I was doing some work where we were barely working, probably not even a full work day every single day. And it was also the time period where I felt one of the most burnt out in my career, because it's not about the hours. And I'm going to tell you in the rest of the episode what it's really about, but it's not just the hours. The other thing that sometimes people think causes burnout is who they're working with, right? So it might be, oh, my boss, I don't like them, I don't interact with them well, or just the overall company culture. It's, too toxic, or it has too much conflict, or I just don't like the culture. So you think, okay, well, I don't like the people I'm working with. That's what's causing me to burn out. So if I just go to a different job and work with different people or have a different culture, that will cure the burnout. But again, if you don't address the actual root cause that I'm telling you about, you can end up in a new culture and then still experience the burnout. And then the last thing that people can think causes burnout is this work doesn't feel meaningful. It doesn't feel like it has a good purpose behind it. I'm just, getting people 5% discounts on things, or I'm just, doing something, like some B2B thing. I'm helping corporations make a little bit more profit, whatever it may be, but you feel like the work isn't meaningful. And so then people think the solution is, well, I should do work that's more meaningful. I should do mission-driven work or work that has a bigger impact in the world, and that will cure my burnout. Obviously, it's a great thing to do mission-driven work. I'm not going to tell you not to do that, but I'm going to tell you why that's not always the root cause of burnout. And so if you do that, if you go from a career that you feel the work is less meaningful and you go to something that's more mission-driven, you can end up recreating the exact burnout that you had already, because that wasn't the true root cause, right? So it's very tempting for people to think I'm working too many hours, or I'm working with not the right people, or I'm not doing meaningful enough work. That's the root cause of my burnout. And so then let me find a job that is fewer hours and or with different people and or that has a different kind of mission or impact to it. And that will solve it, right? That will cure my burnout and I'll never have it again. And like I said, working fewer hours, working with better fit people, having a mission-driven career, all those things are awesome. I'm not telling you not to do that. But those don't actually address the root cause of burnout. So you can make all those pretty intensive changes, right? In your career and still end up burnt out at the end of it all because you didn't address the true root cause. So let me tell you what the true root cause is. Let me kind of give you some setup and explanation first. So first off, all of us are knowledge workers, right? High achievers, your instrument is your brain. If you're an athlete, your instrument is your body. But if you are a high achiever at school and at work, your instrument is your brain. That's what you use to solve business problems and solve people problems all day long, right? So it's helpful to know how your brain works and then tune your instrument, because burnout is a brain problem, right? That's what's actually happening. So in terms of how your brain works, you have an automatic brain and a deliberate brain. If you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, they call these System 1 and System 2. I make it a little simpler and I just call it automatic brain and deliberate brain. Most of us think of ourselves as our deliberate brain, right? That's our conscious experience is you're I'm in control. I'm deciding how to analyze different situations. I'm deciding what to do. I'm deciding how to handle things. That's me. I'm in the driver's seat, right? I'm my deliberate brain and I'm deliberately choosing a bunch of different things to do. But the reality is we are run by our automatic brain, and our automatic brain is almost entirely unconscious. It's all the automatic processing that happens under the surface for you that you're not fully aware of and that you don't have control over, right? It's happening whether you want it to happen or not. You can't turn it off, your automatic brain processing. And your automatic brain is constantly taking in everything that's going on around you. It's also taking in lots of information from your nervous system, everything that's happening inside your body, and it is analyzing all of that stuff. And it is making snap judgments and snap interpretations about what everything means and what you should do about it. And then your automatic brain passes those suggestions up to your deliberate brain, right? So passes those up into your consciousness, and you're like, oh, this is what this means. This is what the implication is. And like, oh, here's the nudge I feel about what I should do about it. And your deliberate brain, you, right? What you experience consciously as yourself, you mostly just go along with your automatic brain suggestions. You mostly don't question them, don't push back, work with them. Most of the time, what happens is your automatic brain is like, here's what the situation means, and here's what you should do about it. And your deliberate brain is like, okay. Or your deliberate brain is like, I came up with that. Right? It totally didn't. Your automatic brain came up with that. Right? So a great analogy for this is the elephant and the rider. You may have heard this analogy before, but it can be helpful to think of your automatic brain as the elephant and your deliberate brain, you, as the rider on top of the elephant, right? And you are mostly just riding along wherever the elephant takes you. And the elephant is kind of making the decisions about what to do and what things mean and where you're going next. And now you can override your automatic brain if you want to, right? If you imagine the elephant and the rider, you, the rider, can like very forcefully like try to control the elephant and try to get it to go somewhere. You can do that. It's hard. It's really, really hard. It's really, really effortful. Chances are your automatic brain will fight you every step of the way because your automatic brain has some very strongly held opinions and it's trying to protect you. And so if you just try to tell it, no, go left instead of going right, chances are it's going to fight you pretty hard and say, no, I'm going the way I want to go, right? Also, it doesn't even yield that great of results. Let's say you could like sedate your automatic brain and just totally lead it exactly where you want it to go, or like you could be the one in charge, you as the rider could be the one in charge. I actually don't think you would want that because you wouldn't get that great of results. Your deliberate brain isn't that fast and it doesn't have as much processing power as your automatic brain does, right? If you think about times when you've actually really, really, really used your deliberate brain, usually it's doing something like doing like long division on paper. And if it's like really complicated and like none of the numbers are dividing well with each other, and so then you're having to like write a lot of numbers down, or if you're having to like memorize things, right? And you like hold lots and lots of information in your brain, or you have to like really, really like understand a super complicated topic and you're having to apply all your brain power to like understand how something works. If you've ever read legal documents, that's how I feel reading legal documents. I've used all my brain power. That's what it feels like to use your deliberate brain. It's very slow, it's very effortful, and it's not a practical part of your brain to use primarily to move through your day. You absolutely need the super fast processing power and just the like processing capacity that your automatic brain has to get you through your day. You cannot be thinking that hard about every little thing on your to-do list. So I actually think the best strategy is not to fight with your automatic brain because it's going to fight back. And also not to like try to sedate it and do everything yourself, right? Do everything deliberately. That's not going to work either. What you really need to do when your instrument is your brain is you need to work with your automatic brain. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand how it's feeling and what state it's in. And you need to figure out how to get it to lead you where you want to go. So let's talk a little bit about the states your automatic brain can be in. Very broadly speaking, there are two states it can be in. And I like to call them above the line and below the line. So of course, your automatic brain has so much nuance in like what it's doing at any given moment, right? It has so many thoughts, it has so many feelings, it has so many suggested actions, right? There's a lot going on under the hood at all times, but very, very broadly speaking, we can categorize what your automatic brain is up to into these two broad states, above the line and below the line. I'm going to start with below the line first. Below the line is basically when your automatic brain has detected a threat somewhere in your environment. It's like, okay, there's a threat here. And because it's detected this threat, it activates protective mechanisms to defend itself against the threat. And protective mechanisms are always automatic and habit-based. They're never going to be thoughtful. They're never going to be deliberate because your system is like, we're under threat. We need to preserve energy. So we're not going to make your deliberate thinking and your nuance, available to you right now. That's very energy intensive. We're going to rely on habit programming, which is very, very energy efficient. Right? So if you're a little bit below the line, that can feel like being on edge, being reactive, feeling stressed or tense. It can also feel like being kind of apathetic and like, I don't care. I just want to give up. And if you're really below the line, that is like full-blown fight or flight, right? Whatever that looks like for you. Now, above the line, on the other hand, is basically when your automatic brain has not detected a threat. And so it doesn't activate any protective mechanisms. And because those protective mechanisms, that habit programming hasn't taken over, your highest level thinking is available to you, right? All of your deliberate brain, all of the nuance, all of your like higher level thinking is just fully available. All your capacity is right there. And I think of this as like, this is who you really are, right? Like your habit programming, your defensive mechanisms. I don't think of that as the true you. The true you is who you are when your protective mechanisms aren't activated and all of you is available to like react live to the situations in front of you. So if you're a little bit above the line, people often experience this as being calm, grounded, content. It can also be productive, in the zone, feeling in flow. And when you're really above the line, that's really that flow state that people enter into where you're just like, it's all so smooth. It's so clear. You know exactly what to do next. Time disappears and you do some of your best work and you feel some of the like best that you can feel as a human being. So broadly speaking, those are the two states your brain can go into, your automatic brain can go into, above the line and below the line. Now, you've experienced both of these states, right? You've experienced being a little above the line, really above the line, a little below the line, really below the line. You've experienced all this for yourself. And so I want you to take a few minutes to really bookmark these for yourself. What do these states feel like for you? I'm going to tell you how these states often show up for high achievers. You have a little bit of like a word bank that you can pull from, but I want you to think about your own experience and take a little time to either jot down on paper or just think in your own brain, what does above the line and below the line look like for you and for your brain? So when high achievers go below the line, a lot of times what I see happening, one, people will overwork, right? And it's not even necessarily about the quantity of work that they do, but it's about the emotion that's driving them, right? Like they're working from anxiety, from fear of failure, from fear of being found out, from fear of people thinking they're stupid, from fear of missing something. And so they work and work and work. And it's like an endless hole, right? Like you can never do enough work when you're in that state. You just like, there's always more to be done. And even if you stop, you still feel like you're behind. You still feel like you haven't done enough and you're probably still thinking about work, right? That's one common feature of like high achiever brains when they go below the line. Another thing that I often see with people is that they procrastinate, right? Which is almost kind of the opposite, where you feel so intimidated by the work or afraid of the work or afraid of the possibility of failure or overwhelmed by the work that you're like, I don't even want to get started. I'm just going to scroll social media, answer some emails, do something else. I'm going to procrastinate this work. The other thing I see really, really often with high achiever brains going below the line is people feeling paralyzed or stuck. They can find it really hard to like make a decision or even just decide what to do next. The word stuck is one that I hear a lot. And I also see, this is related to this, I see a lot of all or nothing thinking, right? Or black and white thinking, where they'll look at the situation in front of them and it'll be framed as a lose-lose situation, right? Or it's like, oh, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I have two bad options, which is like, no wonder then that you feel stuck or paralyzed because you have two bad options in front of you. And then also when high achiever brains are below the line, I notice that they relate to people in a different way. First off, people are very aware of how other people could be judging them, right? You're like very aware of like this person could be thinking this or they could be thinking that. And people tend to take those judgments as the truth. They're like, no, that's true. Like that person thinks I made a stupid comment and I did make a stupid comment. Or that person thinks I didn't do enough and it's true, I didn't do enough, right? So they'll take other people's judgments as truth, whether they're imagining their judgment or they've literally heard their judgment. They'll be like, oh no, that's completely true. And the other thing that will happen is people will prejudge themselves, right, in order to try to avoid other people's judgment. This is where the inner critic comes from, right? Is you start imagining, what could my colleagues say? What could my boss say? What could happen? I'm going to judge myself, right, like per their opinions ahead of time to try to protect myself from their opinion, which in practice just turns into like a really mean inner critic that's just like telling you what you're doing wrong all the time. So that's another feature of like being below the line for a high achiever brain. And then the last thing I'll say is often, the flip side of that, right, is like you're very aware of others' judgments. You take them as the truth. You prejudge yourself to avoid their judgments. The flip side of that is people can also often be quite judgmental of others, right? And not have a lot of nuance in how they see them, and just have a lot of black and white thinking, right? And just kind of think, oh, that person's so annoying. Oh, that person's so stupid. Oh, that person doesn't know what they're doing, right? That's the flip side of how people tend to relate to other human beings when they're below the line, is either afraid of their judgment or you're judging them yourself. So that's what a lot of high achiever brains tend to look like when they're below the line. Like I said, think about your own examples. Yours will, of course, be a little bit different. These are just some of the common themes, but my guess is that at least some of those things resonated as we're thinking about what does your below the line brain tend to do. Now, let me tell you what above the line high achiever brains tend to do. It's really the opposite of a lot of these things. So one is high achiever brains, when they're above the line, tend to go into flow. They tend to do these deep, focused work sessions where it feels energizing, right? It doesn't even feel draining to do the work. It actually feels really fun. And you're like, oh, that was great. Like, even if it was 2 p.m. on a Saturday, like that was actually the best way for me to spend my time. I had so much fun doing it. And you feel energized afterward, or you feel satisfied. Even if you're tired afterward, you're like, oh, that was good. Like, I did a lot and I'm like feeling satisfied now that it's done. And again, it's not quite about the quantity of work you do, but the emotion that's driving it, right? Where the emotion driving it is like curiosity and interest and enjoyment and a sense of purpose. And you're like, oh my God, I could be here all day. Like, I'm just having the best time doing this. At the same time, it's not just about doing like high quantities of work, right? Or doing lots of work. The other thing I see high achiever brains do when they're above the line is they make really quick connections. And they come up with new ideas, right? There can be these like bursts of insight or like bursts of like, oh my God, this is what we need to do next. Or like, this is like the next step here. And sometimes those bursts of insight and those quick connections can actually collapse timelines or simplify things, right? This might be something where you're like, oh my God, I thought I would need 4 hours to do that, but actually I could do it in 30 minutes. Here's what that would look like, right? Or I thought this was this really complicated decision, but actually it just boils down to like these two things. If I can answer these two questions, the decision is made, right? So often there can be these like connections that people make that actually simplifies things, reduces the amount of time and effort things take. And you suddenly like see a very clear path forward for what you can do. The other thing that I see when high achiever brains are above the line is they're not stuck. They're not paralyzed, right? They see the answer. They see what they can do next. It's easier to make decisions. And then people just start taking action. They're like, well, I see the next step, so I'm just going to go do it. Like, obviously, let me just do that. And then that action can build momentum and it snowballs and people get a sense of like, okay, well, I'm on track. I did the first thing and then the next thing. And then I see the next step. Like each step I take, I see the next step after that. This is so easy. I'm just going to keep doing that. When you're analyzing situations, right? When your high achiever brain is above the line, people tend to see a lot of nuance. There's not black and white thinking. There's not this right or wrong answer. There's not this like lose-lose framing, right? Which can make you feel so stuck. People see like the win, like, or maybe even like a win-win situation, like, hey, I'm between two options or two good options, or at the very least, they see a lot of gray between the black and white, and they're able to hold lots of eventualities in their brain. They're not so stuck on like, this is right and this is wrong. They're like, well, if this is true, then I would do this. And if this other thing was true, then I would do this. I can see a lot of perspectives and I can hold all of them in my brain at the same time. And then when it comes to relating to other people, right? When high achiever brains are above the line, it's not that you're not aware of other people's perceptions, right? You don't become delusional when you're above the line. You're aware of other people's perceptions, but you're not ruled by them, right? You're not thinking, oh my God, that's true. And that's the word of law. And that's the end of the story. Instead, you have this ability to be aware of someone else's perception and stay true to your own opinion at the same time. You can hold both, right? You can be like, I can see why that person would think that my project was a failure. I can understand their perspective. And I also know that it wasn't a failure because these things came out of it. And I can hold both of those perspectives at the same time. I can hold the tension between those two perspectives at the same time. And it doesn't take you out, right? You're able to be like, oh, I see it. I see both sides. And then because you're able to hold the tension, because you're able to hold your own truth and the truth of the other person's perception at the same time, you can make a very conscious decision about what you want to do about the gap, right? You can consciously decide, hey, is there anything I agree with? Maybe I want to adjust my perception. Or you might say, you know what? I actually think they're wrong and I'm going to persuade them. I'm going to figure out, like, even though they're feeling so grumpy and so resistant right now, I'm going to figure out exactly what I need to say, exactly what I need to show them to change their perception. Or you might also be like, I'm just going to let it go. It doesn't matter. They can just be wrong. They can be wrong about me. They can be wrong about the situation. It's fine. I can let that go. Right. And whatever decision you make will be very dependent on the situation. But the point is you make a conscious decision. You don't feel like, oh my God, they think my thing is a failure. It is a failure. And now I feel terrible. And now I have to like deal with the reality that my thing was a failure, right? That's below the line thinking. Above the line thinking is, okay, I can see why they would think that. I can also see my own perspective and understand that. And then I can make a conscious decision about what to do with the tension between those two situations, right? So that's how you deal with other people's judgments and other people's opinions of you. And then the flip side of that, right, is when your brain is above the line, you tend to also not be as judgmental of other people. Right? You'll have a lot more nuance in how you see them, how you perceive them. You won't be seeing them in this black and white way. You'll be able to see, oh, these are some of the things they're good at, and these are some of their challenges. And in this situation, this trait of theirs is really helpful. And then in this other situation, that same trait is not as helpful, right? And so there's like good expressions and bad expressions of like who they are helpful or unhelpful. But there's a lot of nuance, a lot of gray, and you're not so kind of judgmental and like black and white about how you think about others. So that's just some word banks, right? Some common themes that I've seen in terms of how high achiever brains tend to act when they're above the line or below the line. But I want you to bookmark this for yourself. Like take a couple minutes, and you may have even done it while I was talking, but like either jot down or even just mentally bookmark, what does your above the line brain tend to look like, feel like? What does it tend to do? How does it tend to handle situations? And then how does your below the line brain tend to think and feel and handle situations? And the reason that it's so important to bookmark this, right? For a lot of below the line behaviors, high achievers know that they're not effective, right? So if you're procrastinating, if you're really stuck and paralyzed, if you're like overly worried about like everyone's perception of you and your inner critic is really loud or you're really judgmental, right? These are things where you yourself will probably be like, yeah, I don't love this behavior. Like I need to change it, right? So there's some below the line behaviors that you yourself know are not super helpful, right? And you want to change them. But there's some below the line behaviors that I notice high achievers get really attached to because they don't see them as unhelpful. They actually see them as helpful. The two big ones are the overworking, right? When your brain is below the line and then is like overworking from like anxiety and fear of failure, I will hear people tell me that's not overworking, that's just high performance. Right? And then the other area that I see people holding on to below the line behaviors is with their all or nothing analysis of the situation, right? When your brain frames up a situation and is like, here's all the problems with all my options. And so here's the lose-lose. Here's the rock and the hard place I'm stuck between. Here are the two bad options I have, right? People will be like, no, that's just true. Like that's just my accurate analysis of the situation. And so those are the two most common areas where I see high achievers mistaking below the line behavior for helpful behavior, right? Or below the line analysis from their brain as helpful analysis from their brain, right? And that's why I think it's so important to do this bookmarking exercise for yourself, because that's when you'll be able to see, oh, when I'm above the line and I work, that sense of being in flow or that sense of actually seeing the quick 80-20 way to do something, that's actually more effective than my overworking when I'm below the line, right? And similarly, you'll be able to say, hey, when I'm above the line and I'm analyzing a situation and I don't go into all or nothing thinking, I don't frame it as a lose-lose, I'm actually able to see lots of nuance and lots of shades of gray, and I'm able to find the win-win option. Wait, that's a better analysis than my below the line analysis of the situation. That's what I wanted to call out. And that's why it's important to do that bookmarking. So you can see some of those below the line perspectives and behaviors you might actually be really attached to, because you might think this is what high performance looks like, or this is just the logical truth of the situation. But when you do the bookmarking and you really articulate what your above the line brain looks like and how it operates and how it thinks, you'll be able to see, oh, that's actually still low performance or lower performance. There's even higher performance and better, clearer thinking available to me when I'm above the line. So that's why this bookmarking is so important. So bringing this back to burnout, right? If your automatic brain being below the line led to better performance, I wouldn't even be talking to you about this whole topic. I would literally be like, you know what? No pain, no gain. This is the cost of success. Burnout is what's necessary to get there. So just like man up and get it done, right? That would be like my advice, right? If I'm trying to help you succeed in your career and build the career you actually want. Luckily, that's not my advice. I actually don't think that's true, right? The truth is your brain being below the line is a lose-lose experience. It feels worse for you, right? It feels stressful and tense. It doesn't feel good internally, and it leads to worse performance. This is so crazy to me, right? That it's like a genuine lose-lose. It feels worse and you have worse outcomes. Now, I do want to caveat and say your below the line performance is probably still really, really good from an objective perspective. Sometimes people can get a little bit like freaked out once they gain awareness of above the line and below the line states of their brain. And they can start thinking, oh my gosh, I have to keep my brain above the line all the time, because if it's ever below the line, it's just doing crap work, right? It's just like zero value being outputted. That's not true at all, right? You have such a like high performance, high horsepower brain. Your below the line performance is still incredible, right? Your below the line is probably higher than some other people's above the line performance, right? So it's not that your like value creation goes to zero if your brain is below the line, not at all, right? It's just that your performance can be even better if you're above the line. And by the way, your internal experience is going to be a lot better if you're above the line. So I just want to caveat that, right? But the reality is being below the line is a genuine lose-lose experience in terms of you having a worse internal experience and you not delivering as good performance as you possibly could. And the flip side of that is being above the line is a genuine win-win experience, right? It feels better internally. You have a better internal experience. It feels energizing. It feels purposeful. It feels meaningful. It feels like you're in flow. When you do rest, you can really rest and like really detach and not be like half thinking about work still because you're still worried about it. Like the internal experience is so much better and your external performance is better. I'm just like, oh my gosh, you guys, we have to get to this state. This is so good. It's a true win-win. You feel better and you do better work. Like, we've got to get your brain in above the line as much as possible, or certainly get it out of being below the line, right? And so that's why I think this is so important. So let's talk about what puts your automatic brain above the line or below the line. So I told you earlier, right? Your brain goes below the line when it detects a threat, and your brain stays above the line when it doesn't detect a threat. I'm going to add a little bit of nuance now to what I just said. The truth is, it's not when your brain detects or doesn't detect a threat. It really is when your automatic brain interprets something as a threat, right? So your automatic brain, your elephant that you're riding on, goes below the line when it interprets something as a threat. Not when it is a threat, but when your brain interprets something as a threat. Because the truth is, threat is a framing, not a fact. This is a threat, is an interpretation. It's a subjective interpretation that your brain makes. It's not an objective truth in the world, right? This object is blue is an objective truth. This object is a threat is a subjective interpretation, right? And so this is a threat. Threat framing is a framing. It's an interpretation that your brain makes. It's not a truth in the world. And this is what actually creates burnout. This is the root cause of burnout. It's not the hours. It's not your boss. It's not your colleagues. It's not the meaninglessness of the work you're doing. What really creates burnout is your automatic brain consistently interpreting things as threats, and then going below the line and then staying below the line for long periods of time. I'm going to say this one more time because it's so important. The root cause of your burnout is not the number of hours you're working. It's not the people you're working with. And it's not the meaningfulness or purposefulness of the work you're doing, right? Or the lack thereof. That is not what's causing your burnout, which means going to a job that has less hours, different people, and has more meaningful mission-driven work is not necessarily going to cure your burnout, because it's not necessarily addressing the root cause. The root cause of your burnout is your brain consistently interpreting things around you as threats, and then going below the line and staying below the line for long periods of time. And if you have the habit of interpreting certain things as threats, you can do that while working fewer hours, while working with different people, and while doing a quote unquote more mission-driven kind of work, right? Because none of those are addressing the root cause, because we haven't looked at what is your brain interpreting as a threat and how do we update its interpretation so that it stops interpreting those things as threats. So let me give you some common threat framings and the common things that we usually have to rewire when I'm working with my clients, right? These are the real root causes that are causing your brain to go into burnout. One is, I can't get all of this done. I have too much on my plate. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm going to get it all done. I can't get it all done, but it does all need to get done, right? That's an example of a threat framing. That's an example of a stressful, threatening interpretation of your circumstances that your brain can generate, which was then going to put your brain below the line. And you can think that thought. You can have that interpretation in a different job. You can do it when you're working with different people, working fewer hours, doing more mission-driven work. Your brain is still 100% capable of thinking, wait, there's too much on my plate. I can't get it all done. I'm so overwhelmed, but it all does need to get done. And now I'm stressed and I feel behind. Right? That is a framing, that is an interpretation that your brain is probably in the habit of making, and it's going to just keep making that interpretation if you don't change the habit. So that's one threat framing. Another threat framing that's very common for high achievers and that causes burnout is, I'm doing a bad job. I'm doing a bad job, but I either don't know how to do this better, or I don't have time to do this better, or I'm just not talented at this. I'm not good at this in general. And so I'm doing a bad job and I can't do any better, or I'm afraid I can't, or I don't know how to, or I don't have time to, right? That's another very common threat framing that your brain might be running on repeat. And again, not solved by working fewer hours, working with different people, or doing more mission-driven work. That's a brain habit. That's a mental habit that your brain has to interpret situations that way. A third threat framing, right, that causes high achievers to burn out is, people are upset with me, or people don't like me, or people aren't impressed with me, right? People have a bad impression of me, and I can't figure out how to change their impression or how to build a better relationship with them, right? That's a third threat framing that will send your brain below the line, because often high achievers are very aware of their reputation and their standing with other people for good reason, right? It's often very important in the kind of work you're doing to have a really strong reputation. And so your brain will feel threatened by this perception of like, ooh, people aren't impressed with me. They don't have a good impression of me. And I can't figure out how to change that impression or how to build a better relationship, right? That's a third threat framing that's common. And again, if your brain is in the habit of interpreting situations that way, it's going to keep doing that in another job. A fourth threat framing, right, that high achiever brains can get into is I'm facing a conflict or a disagreement with someone, and I don't know how to work through it with them. I don't know how to work through it without either like losing my reputation, right? And like showing weakness or like getting really angry with them, which wouldn't work. Or I have to just give up what I want, right? I have to say, okay, we'll just do it your way. So I don't know how to work through this conflict or disagreement that I'm having with someone without either hurting the relationship or losing what I want and my stance, right? And my agenda that I'm trying to advance. That's a fourth threat framing that your brain can come up with and keep running on repeat. And that can keep playing even in a different job and continue to burn you out. And then the fifth threat framing that I see very often with people is I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do this type of work. I don't want to be on this career path. Something about this like doesn't feel right to me, but I also don't know how to like support my lifestyle and like save face in front of my family and friends if I'm not doing this, right? That's another threat framing where it's like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this, right? And this is often kind of more macro in terms of the type of job or the type of career path you're on, but it'll be this threat framing of like, I don't want to do this, but I have to for financial reasons and for social reasons, right? So I don't want to, but I have to. So those are 5 very, very common threat framings that I see high achiever brains getting into, which cause them a lot of stress. It pushes your brain below the line because all of those feel like very real threats. And then if we don't resolve those threats, if we don't figure out how to pull your brain back above the line to handle the situation, your brain just being stuck below the line, feeling like it's constantly under threat because there's too much on your plate, you're doing a bad job, people are upset with you, or they don't have a positive impression of you, there's conflict and disagreement you don't know how to resolve, and by the way, you don't even want to do this work. You feel like you're trapped here because for financial reasons and social reasons, right? Sometimes all 5 of those happen at the same time, and that's quite stressful for people. Right. But that's what's really causing the burnout. It's not the hours you're working. It's not the people you're working with. It's not the like mission driven or purposeful like aspect of your work. That's not the root cause, right? The root cause is the threat framing that your brain is generating about your career, about your job, about your relationships at your job and your work at the actual work at your job, which often falls into these 5 different, common categories. That threat framing is what is pushing your brain below the line and causing burnout. And you can change jobs and have fewer hours and different people and more mission-driven work and still have those same interpretations. You can still feel like there's too much on my plate and I'm doing a bad job and people don't have a good impression of me and I don't know how to resolve conflict and I don't know how, and I don't want to do this work. All of those same thoughts and those same interpretations can keep popping up because they're really mental habits, right? They're how your brain tends to interpret your situation no matter where you are. So that's the real root cause of burnout. It's not all these external things. It is what you are thinking and feeling. It's the consistent habitual threat framing that your automatic brain is putting onto your situation that's pushing it below the line for long periods of time and making you burn out. So how do you resolve this? This is the most important part, right? Like I always say the second most important part. The first most important part is having an understanding of the actual causal mechanism, the actual root cause that's causing your burnout. Because without that, you can't build a root cause solution, right? You can't address the real underlying cause and actually knock this thing out. But the next most important part, once you know the root cause, is what are you supposed to do about it, right? How do you resolve it? To resolve it, I want you to book your free career audit with me, because not only are we going to audit your career and what's going on externally, we are going to audit your brain and look at what's going on internally, right? We're going to get into what are the specific threat framings that your brain is coming up with in your particular situation and why. Right? Why is it continually thinking those things? I gave you those 5 broad examples of like what very common threat framings are. But everyone's situation is unique. And the most important thing we have to do is get into your situation, your context, the particulars of your job, and the particulars of your brain, right? What is your brain doing? How is it interpreting these situations in a way that's pushing it below the line again and again all day long, right? So we have to understand the current threat framings that your brain is generating about your career. And then we have to work together to figure out how are we going to resolve these threats, right? Your brain is really good at resolving threats. And if these were the kinds of threats that it knew how to resolve already, it would have already done that, right? The reason that these threats are staying open in your brain and your brain is staying below the line is it doesn't know how to resolve these threats by itself. It's basically screaming out at you being like, hi, We need thought partnership. We need time set aside, and we need to actually break this down and work this out. We have to resolve this. I'm telling you again and again and again, I'm telling you every day, this is an open issue. This is an open issue. This is an open issue, right? We really need to solve this. You need the time, the space, and the thought partnership to actually work through these alarms that your brain is bringing to you, right? And that's what I do with my clients is we're going to sit down and actually work through like, hey, these threats that your brain is opening and giving to you, right? Like these open issues that your brain keeps giving you, let's actually work through them. Let's figure out what you're going to do about them and resolve the threat, right? Whether that means you have to think differently and have a different perception of the situation and a different mental model for the situation, it could be the case. Or sometimes you actually have to do something differently, right? And you have to actually take different action. So for example, if the threat that the open threat your brain keeps bringing you is, I'm stretched too thin, there's too much for me to do and I'm overwhelmed, right? It could be the case that you need to think differently, which could be, hey, I'm actually making every task really big. I'm assuming that everything has to be done to like 300% quality, but actually most things don't have to be done to that level. A lot of things can be done to like 20%, 50%, 80% quality, and then only a couple really high priority things need to be done to 300% quality. And once I apply that filter, suddenly there is enough time to do everything, right? So that's an example of thinking differently in response to the threat of like, I have too much to do and I'm stretched too thin. But also you might have to do something differently. We might look at everything on your plate and be like, no, you actually have too much to do. Like, we can't simplify this. We can't make it any easier. It's not you being a perfectionist, right? Or having too high of a bar for the work that you have to do. Actually, there's too much on your plate, because even if we right size your level of effort and like level of quality to everything, and like we do everything we can internally to get it all done, there's too much on your plate. So we have to figure out, like, are you delegating? Are you communicating that some things are going to be dropped? Like, what are we doing? So sometimes you have to actually handle the situation differently to handle the threat. And then sometimes in the most extreme case, you might even decide, hey, I need to be in a different job altogether, right? Like, I've done everything I can to try to handle this as well as possible. The reality is my environment is not supportive of me. This isn't the right place for me to be, so I need to go somewhere else, right? So I don't know what the answer is going to be for you, but I know for sure that we have to actually start looking at the questions and the threats and the alarms that your brain is giving you, right? If your brain knew how to resolve it on its own, it would have already done so, right? And the reality is it needs a little bit of help. It needs some space, it needs some time, and it needs some thought partnership to really unpack and look at, these are the threats, these are the alarms, right? These are the things I'm trying to tell you. That's what your brain is saying, is like, there's all these open issues. I'm trying to communicate this to you, right? And they're open. I haven't figured out how to resolve them. And we have to get together. We have to look at what's going on externally and internally in your career, do your career audit and your brain audit, and figure out what are the messages your brain is trying so hard to tell you, and how can we create the space and the time and give you some expert thought partnerships so that you can actually resolve these issues. You can close them. You can resolve the threat. And once the threats are resolved, you're going to feel a million times better. Your brain is going to be like, okay, now I can deactivate the protective mechanisms and I can go back above the line, and I can go back to that zone of achievement that I love to be in, where I'm doing great work. I'm enjoying doing it. There's lots of nuance. There's lots of win-win options. I enjoy how I relate to people. I'm not super judgmental. I can hold the tension between my opinion and someone else's. All of those things are so critical to being able to create the career that you actually want. The number one skill to be able to do that is to notice when your brain has gone below the line, and then create space and time to talk to it, work through the issue, resolve the threat, and then bring your brain back above the line. It's exactly what I do with my clients. And I really recommend do this with somebody, right? If you already knew how to do this, you would have done it. Trust me. I know how painful the problem is. So if you already had the tools and skills to resolve it, you 100% would have already resolved it. And if it's still open, it's because you still need some more tools and some more expertise to help you resolve these things. This is really common. This is really simple. I do this all day long. I have lots of pattern recognition. I have lots of solutions locked and loaded and ready to go that can help you, but that's because I do this all day, right? And so I have all the like tools and expertise that I've built up. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't put pressure on yourself to do it all by yourself. Book your free career audit, and let's really dive into what's going on in your career and in your brain. What are the threat framings your brain is coming up with, and how can we create the time and space for you to work through them, resolve them, and then spend your time above the line, which is where I know you'd love to be. All right, I can't wait to talk to you. The link to book a free career audit is in the episode description. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Aligned Ambition podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and share this podcast with anyone you know that you think could use it. If you'd like to explore working together in a one-on-one coaching engagement with me, book a free consult call at poojavcoaching.com/contact. You can grab that link in the episode description. And if you have any questions, thoughts, or topics you want me to cover in this podcast, shoot me an email at pooja@poojavcoaching.com. You can grab that in the episode description too. Talk to you soon.